Hey everybody, welcome to my channel Be Free Now with Maria. So today I want to talk about how we block our own joy and how to cultivate our joy. So how do we block our joy? That we do by distrusting ourselves and distrusting the process of life. In other words, when we don't trust ourselves, when we don't think that we're capable of something, or we're worried that bad things are going to happen, we're going to start to decrease our joy, right? Because instead of feeling relaxed and joyful, we're going to feel this worry, this anxiety, and this need to control. So when we tell ourselves these stories, right, in our head, we don't really necessarily stop to consciously think about how they affect us, but they affect us. And when I'm talking about stories, I'm talking about the inner dialogue. In other words, we tell ourselves, oh, I can't do that job. I'm not as smart as them, right? Undermining ourselves, not acknowledging what we do bring to the table, right? So those kinds of stories, that kind of inner dialogue is going to make us feel less than, and we're not going to then go for it or take that leap. Or if we're a single parent and we're thinking, oh, I can't get into this, into a relationship because my partner will abuse my children, then, well, you're going to be scared and hold back, right? We can't move forward if we're feeling scared like that. And we're likely then to say, I'll date later on. The reality is, right, that there's also the opposite. That's a possibility. Maybe this new partner can learn to love your children and be kind to your children. But when we focus on the fearful thought or the thought of us not being enough, we're going to hold ourselves back. And every time we do that, we decrease our joy, right? Because instead of running towards what we want, we're running away from what we want. And once we do that, we're definitely starting to decrease our joy, and we're going to start feeling heavy, yucky, and so forth. And then we'll tell ourselves, no, it's because, it's a dangerous world. But the reality is that we're also focusing on what can go wrong as opposed to what can go right. And that's not to dismiss that there are dangers, happening in this world. But I also like to remind myself, right, that may be fact, but it's not my spiritual truth. And I believe I heard Louise L. Hay say that years ago, and I've been affirming it, for many years. And I don't know if I quoted it correctly, but I'm almost sure it's her who I heard say that. And but I've loved it anyway, because it reminds me, right, that yeah, bad things do happen, and there are things happening that are, scary and can feel overwhelming. But it doesn't have to be my spiritual truth. In other words, it doesn't have to necessarily be my story. And so my job, right, is to, yes, use discretion, but I also have to trust. Right? I have to trust myself. I have to trust the process of life. I have to trust my intuition, and I have to listen to it. In other words, if I find myself feeling scared, then I need to acknowledge that, try to understand that as opposed to ignoring it or further validating it with what I'm hearing of what's going on in the world. Because if I do that, then I'm going to stay in that cycle and hold myself back and decrease my joy, right? Because every time I'm running or holding myself back, anytime any of us are doing that, we are decreasing our joy and subconsciously blocking ourselves from our joy and not even realizing it, because we're thinking it's what's happening externally, but it's really what we're thinking. It's that inner dialogue within ourselves and that distrust, right, that's running the show. And so we want to be able to shift that, right? Because we want to cultivate more joy, right? Yes, we need to affirm, right, that this may be, we can affirm that, which is what I said, right? This may be fact, but it's not my spiritual truth. And we could affirm many other things, right? It's like, I'm choosing, we can even affirm, I choose to learn, right, how to trust myself. I choose anything that feels good, that cultivates an inner dialogue, right, that supports what you're choosing consciously, right? As opposed to just letting ourselves affirm the negative, right? Affirm the positive, consciously affirming the positive. And it's just a mental exercise that is consciously bringing us back to where we want to be mentally. It doesn't necessarily mean that we do trust, right? When we don't trust, or that we're not feeling scared. And so then we can frame it as I choose to, right? Or I give myself permission, or I am willing to. And we can start it off like that, right? And meeting ourselves where we're at. It's not about lying to ourselves. It's about cultivating something, different and more expanded than just it's dangerous out there, or I can't do this, or I can't do that, or I don't have the qualifications and so forth, and we're scaring ourselves and negating the other possibility, right? Which is that we can, let's say for example, if it was a work situation, that we can learn as we go along with the job. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have some understanding of the job, right? I'm talking about when we do have an understanding of the job and we do actually technically qualify for it, but we need to also give ourselves space for that learning curve, right? For learning how things work in that business and figuring out how to use our skill, the skills that we have in that environment, and being patient with that process, right? So we want to remember that, and we also want to remember that we are part, we are connected, right, with this divine energy that lives and breathes through us. And when we remind ourselves of that, right, then we're not necessarily focusing on just being dependent on the external, right? We start to trust that there is this synchronicity to life, right? And that there is this organization that there's a part of that we're involved in. In other words, like, we do our part and then we let go. It's because that's all we can do, right? We can only do our part. We can't control all of the elements, but nor do we need to. We need to just, right, trust ourselves, trust in the process of life, show up for life. And when we do that, then we're inviting life in. We are moving more towards what we want. And yes, we can feel some anxiety while we're doing it, but we work through that, right? In other words, we acknowledge it and we address it so that we can move forward in the direction that we want and start building and increasing our joy. Because like I said, every time we run away from it and we get discouraged, or we, say, oh, it's too hard, or whatever it is, or I'm not enough in some way, shape, or form, and overwhelm ourselves with those kinds of thoughts, we're going to move further and further away from what we want. And we want to cultivate more joy, and the only way to be able to bring ourselves into that space is being present with what is, and telling ourselves things that remind us that we are part of something bigger, meaning we're part of the unseen world, as well as we are experiencing a physical body, and we are here, right, to learn, and that it is okay to make mistakes. It's okay to make space for the learning curves, and it's okay, right, to be scared. It's okay to have all emotions and experiences, as long as, right, we're willing to be there for ourselves, as opposed to run from it and pretend it's not happening, or to hold on to the stories, that we tell ourselves for dear life and make them our ultimate truths, when they're really not our ultimate truths. They're an expression of our fear, and fear, it's something that's part of the human experience. And so our job, right, is to learn to coexist with it and to understand it, because we might not necessarily be able to extinguish it 100%, or maybe the way that you want to 100%, but you can definitely make a lot of waves and increase your joy by doing so. Even if every step doesn't feel light and fluffy, we will eventually bring ourselves to a more joyful place when we're running towards, as opposed to away from what we really want. So before I end, I do want to pick a word from my bag of words and see what else I'm inspired to share. Oh, faith. You can't make it up. Okay, so faith. I love that. Because yes, faith is exactly what we need to have, right? Because that's part of trusting ourselves. But we're having faith in the unseen. Like I said, we do our part and then we let go. And practicing faith is huge, right? It's not something that happens without our conscious focus. So it is something that we need to do consciously every day. So whether we're reading something that helps establish our faith, or we write something that we can read daily that can remind us, right, to walk in faith, to hold on to that faith, then we do that. But it is important that we incorporate some form of faith if we are to work through some of the fears, right, and bring ourselves more closer to what it is that we want to cultivate for ourselves, and that is increasing our sense of joy in the present moment and through the process and through the journey. In other words, things don't necessarily have to be perfect before we can experience joy. We can experience joy with what is in the present moment. In other words, even the parts that we're not so excited about, we can experience joy by knowing that, yeah, this too shall pass. This is a moment in time. This isn't written in stone. This is part of the learning curve. I am okay and I can tolerate this. In other words, I am okay because I can tolerate it. I choose to tolerate it, and therefore I can tolerate it. Right? So remembering that, and then holding on to that faith and walking in that direction. All right, so I'm going to end with that. I hope that's helped you in some way. Have a beautiful day. Bye for now.